Jackson Ainsley was no stranger to danger, but Xiphus 4 was different. The planet was a graveyard, its barren surface littered with the remains of ancient battles, wrecked ships, and forgotten lives. A perfect hiding place for mercenaries. A perfect place for a woman like her to disappear or make her mark, depending on what was required. Today, she had come here with a single goal: retrieve intel on the alien technology buried deep beneath the planet's surface. What she didn't plan on was getting captured. The wind howled across the desolate terrain, kicking up ash and dirt, cutting through the makeshift armor she wore. It was a constant reminder that survival on Xiphus 4 wasn't a guarantee. Jax adjusted the weight of her blaster as she crouched behind the charred remains of a military outpost. She could hear them, mercenaries, moving quietly, setting up an ambush. They were good, she had to give them that. Better than most. But they didn't know her. A rustle from behind. The crack of a twig underfoot. Jax spun around, already pulling her blaster into position. But she was too slow. "Don't move," a voice barked. Harsh. Military trained. A gun barrel pressed against the back of her head, the cold metal making her freeze. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last," she said, her voice calm, measured. The figure behind her stepped into view. Tall, broad-shouldered. His face was covered by a breathing mask, but his eyes were sharp, predatory. A professional. Jax's instincts flared, but she didn't show it. The last thing she needed was to appear vulnerable. "You don't get to say anything," the mercenary growled, tightening his grip on her arm and pushing her forward. She resisted the urge to fight back. There were more of them, hidden in the shadows. She wasn't stupid. She'd been here before. Captured more times than she cared to admit. "Just get me to your boss," she said, playing it cool. If they were going to kill her, they'd do it quickly. But the silence that followed her words told her they weren't planning to do that, not yet, anyway. The air smelled of burning ozone as they marched her through the wreckage, their guns trained on her at all times. She couldn't help but notice the faint glow of blue beneath the sand, a remnant of the planet's long-lost civilization. The technology here wasn't just alien. It was ancient. And dangerous. They reached their hideout, a partially ruined bunker. Its steel doors had been breached long ago, leaving it exposed to the elements. Inside, the sound of faint voices echoed. She knew who awaited her. Captain Vorak Skarn. The name had haunted the military files. A former strategist turned rogue, now leading this mercenary group. Jax had heard the rumors. Vorak didn't take prisoners. They pushed her inside the bunker, and she was immediately thrown to the floor. Her blaster was ripped from her hands, and her weapons stripped away. They wanted her helpless. It was a classic move. They underestimated her. "Get up, Ainsley," a voice commanded. Cold, authoritative. Jax didn't move. Not immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, taking in her surroundings. She could feel the familiar weight of the chains holding her, but she wasn't concerned. "Not yet." "Let me guess," she said slowly, lifting her head to meet the eyes of the man standing before her. "You're Captain Skarn. The one and only mercenary leader with a reputation that precedes him." There was a brief moment of silence, and then he laughed. A low, rumbling sound that echoed off the metal walls. "Smartass," he muttered. "You'll find that being smart won't help you here." Jax didn't reply. She simply studied him. Vorak Skarn was taller than most, with a narrow, cruel face and piercing green eyes. He wore armor, weathered and worn from countless battles. The scars on his face were just as telling. This man had lived through his share of wars, and his reputation for being ruthless wasn't just a story. "So, what's the plan?" Jax asked, her voice steady. "You think you're going to torture me into revealing what I know? The tech is buried. It's not going anywhere. You've already lost." Vorak leaned against a table, his arms crossed. He studied her, eyes narrowing. "Not everything's about the tech, Ainsley. We need leverage, and you? You're it. Jax's brow furrowed. Leverage? Vorak's smirk was cold. You've got a history, don't you? You led a fleet, once. You were a commander. People respected you. What they don't know is that I can sell you to the highest bidder. A captured fleet commander, alive. That's worth more than anything you could offer. Jax met his gaze, unflinching. The idea of being sold for a price didn't bother her. It was just another form of bargaining. But something in her gut told her Vorak wasn't lying. He knew who she was, and what she could do. You're wasting your time, she said softly. You won't get a damn thing out of me. Is that so? Vorak's tone shifted, becoming sharper. Maybe you think you're invincible, but you're not. I'll break you, just like I've broken every other commander who thought they were above me. Jax could feel her pulse quicken, but she didn't let it show. She knew how to deal with men like Vorak. The question was whether she could escape before he made his move. You can try, she replied, standing up slowly, facing him. But when you're done, there'll be nothing left to break. Vorak chuckled, the sound grating against her nerves. We'll see about that. With a swift gesture, he signaled to his men. Jax was shoved toward a metal chair, and restraints were snapped around her wrists. But her mind was already working, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She had survived worse than this. And she wasn't about to let some mercenary kingpin take her down. Not today. You'll regret this, she muttered, as the chains dug into her skin. The door slammed shut behind her, and Jax's thoughts turned inward. She was a prisoner now, but not for long. She had something Vorak didn't, the knowledge of how to survive. And she'd need every ounce of it if she was going to escape. But for now, she'd wait. The time to act would come. And when it did, Vorak would learn the hard way that underestimating Jaxine Ainsley was the last mistake he'd ever make. Jax had been in worse situations. She'd been trapped in a collapsing hull of a battleship, suffocated in the depths of a foreign atmosphere, and even survived a planet-wide orbital bombardment. None of it had felt as suffocating as the silence in the cold, dimly lit room where Vorak Skarn stood over her. The cuffs bit into her wrists as she sat, tethered to the steel chair. Her mind raced, calculating her next move, while Vorak paced in front of her like a predator preparing to pounce. Your reputation precedes you, Commander, he said, the words almost too casual. I was hoping it would be a little more substantial. Jax didn't flinch, didn't let her gaze waver as Vorak circled her. He was trying to provoke her, trying to gauge if she was the same woman from the records, the woman who had commanded a fleet. He thought he could break her, but he was wrong. She was already broken. There was nothing left to crack. You're wasting your time, she replied flatly. I've already told you. The tech is buried. Even if you kill me, you won't find it. Vorak stopped in front of her, eyes narrowing. He studied her, as if sizing up a dangerous animal. It's not the tech I'm interested in, Ainsley, he said. Not anymore. Jax raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. She couldn't let herself be distracted, but curiosity clawed at her. What then? A name. Your name. Her heart skipped a beat. A sense of cold dread ran down her spine. What are you talking about? Vorak leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. You think I don't know who you are? Who you were? He stepped back, a slow grin spreading across his face. I've seen the files. You were the youngest fleet commander in the Alliance, weren't you? Jaxine Jax Ainsley. Known for your ability to turn impossible odds into victories. Your callsign, his eyes gleamed. They all said you were the best. She stiffened, but her face remained impassive. She wasn't going to let him see that he was getting under her skin. Let me guess, she said, leaning forward, meeting his gaze. You think the ghost of my former self will help you in some way. Maybe if you mention my callsign, you'll break me. But you're wrong. I left that life behind a long time ago. Vorak chuckled darkly. You don't get to walk away from it. It follows you. Just like the legend of the dagger. The mention of her call sign hit her like a slap in the face. The dagger. She hadn't heard that name in years, and she never expected it to resurface. It was the name she had earned in the military, fast, decisive, and merciless. It was what had made her a legend in the fleet, but it also made her a target. People feared the dagger, and for good reason. No one had ever escaped her traps once she'd locked her sights on them. Vorak's voice dropped to a whisper. The dagger isn't a name. It's a weapon. It's power. And you are power, Ainsley. That's why you're valuable. You think I'll kill you to get the tech? No. I'll use you. I'll use the dagger. Jax couldn't suppress the instinct to recoil, but she kept her face blank. She had to keep control. Her call sign, her identity, it was all part of the past she tried to bury. But Vorak was right about one thing, the name had power. And if it was out there, it could change everything. Why the hell do you think I'm sitting here, she said, voice tight. You know as well as I do that your little mercenary group is nothing but a band of scavengers. I could wipe you out in a heartbeat if I had my freedom. The dagger? It's a dead man's name. Is it? Vorak's smile grew wider. Then why did you hesitate? Jax clenched her fists. She had to keep it together. Focus. Vorak stepped back, seeming to savor the moment. I think you're lying to yourself, Ainsley. You don't want to be forgotten. You don't want to die as some mercenary with nothing left to show for your life. You want the power. You want to be feared again. And you will help me find that tech, because in the end, it's your reputation I'm after. Not the intel. Her stomach turned, but Jax couldn't afford to show weakness. She'd fought too long to reclaim her freedom, to keep her past from consuming her. If you think you can just throw around my call sign and get me to do your bidding, you're even dumber than I thought, she said coldly. I'm not your puppet, Skarn. Vorak cocked his head. Maybe not. But I think you'll do what I say, because you're just like the rest of them. You crave the battle. You crave the chaos. You're the dagger, Ainsley. You're born for this. Jax's jaw tightened, her mind racing. She had to think her way out of this. Vorak was playing mind games, trying to bait her into something. But Jax was smarter than that. She knew the stakes, and the last thing she was going to do was let her past destroy her future. Tell me where it is, Vorak pressed, his voice low. Where is the alien tech? You know what it's capable of. Together, we can control everything. You'll get what you want, and I'll get mine. Jax's thought sharpened. The tech was a weapon, a tool of unimaginable power. But she wasn't sure who was more dangerous, Vorak Skarn or the alien intelligence that had created it. The stakes were higher than he realized. I don't know what you're talking about, Jax said evenly, keeping her eyes locked on his. You'll get nothing from me. Vorak's expression darkened, but his smile didn't waver. We'll see about that. You've got two choices. You cooperate, or you die with a name that means nothing. A chill ran through Jax. She wasn't going to die here, not today. But she knew the game was just beginning. And Vorak had made a mistake. He didn't know how far she was willing to go to make sure he didn't control her. Her past had caught up with her, but she wasn't about to let it define her again. Not when the stakes were this high. Then I guess we'll see what happens when the dagger is unleashed again, she muttered under her breath, a glimmer of defiance lighting her eyes. Vorak didn't hear her, but he would soon enough. The air inside the bunker grew thicker as the hours dragged on. Time lost its meaning. Each minute that passed seemed to drag Jax deeper into the labyrinth of her own mind, where fragments of her past resurfaced like ghosts, clawing at her from the edges of her memories. She had trained herself to suppress the weight of her history, but here, in the cold, sterile room, it pressed down on her harder than ever. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a symbol of everything she had once been, everything she had tried to escape. Vorik Skarn had made her an offer: cooperate, and he would let her live. Help him locate the alien technology buried beneath Xiphus 4, and he'd give her freedom. It was an offer too tempting to dismiss, yet Jax knew better than to trust him. There was always a catch, always a hidden agenda lurking beneath the surface. But what other choice did she have? Jax had spent years carving out a life in the shadows, far from the war and the power struggles that had once defined her. Now, here she was, back in the center of it, forced to make a choice she'd hoped to avoid. She couldn't afford to ignore the reality in front of her. The alien tech was not just a weapon, it was the key to everything. Whoever controlled it could reshape the galaxy. The stakes had just risen exponentially. The door to her cell slid open with a hiss, breaking her thoughts. Vorik stepped in, his sharp eyes immediately locking onto hers. "Don't think I don't know what you're doing, Ainsley," he said, his tone flat. "Trying to play the stoic, detached mercenary. It won't work on me." Jax didn't respond. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him. The way he carried himself, his arrogance, his confidence, it was all part of the same game. He thought he had the upper hand, but Jax knew how to play these games. "You made your offer," she said, her voice calm but tinged with a cold edge. "But let's be clear. I don't do deals with people I can't trust." "And you," she paused for a beat, letting the silence hang between them. "You've never been someone I'd trust." Vorik raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Trust is a luxury, Ainsley. You don't need trust to make things work. You need leverage." "Leverage," she repeated, almost as if tasting the word. "I've had my fill of that in my lifetime." He stepped closer, his boots clanking against the cold floor. "You think I don't know what you're capable of? You led entire fleets, Ainsley. You didn't just win battles, you destroyed your enemies. You're a weapon. And I'm giving you a chance to use that weapon again." Jax's fingers twitched, and for a brief moment, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to have her freedom back. To be in control again. She could slip from this place, take out Vorik and his mercenaries, and disappear once more into the galaxy. But she'd played that game before. She knew what happened when she went down that path: it led to destruction. And she wasn't sure she had the strength to rebuild everything again. "I'm not your soldier," she said, her voice colder now. "I don't take orders." "And yet, you will," Vorik replied, his lips curling into a smug smile. "Because you have no other choice. You want to survive, don't you? You want to escape this hellhole and find a way out of the mess you've made of your life. This is your way out." Jax's gaze hardened. "What do you want from me, Skarn?" Vorik tilted his head, clearly savoring the moment. "I want the tech. I want to know where it is. And I want you to help me find it." She didn't say anything immediately. The idea of helping Vorik, it didn't sit right with her. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. There was no way to do this alone, and if the tech was what she suspected, it was something too dangerous for anyone to control. Perhaps, in the end, helping Vorik was the lesser of two evils. "What makes you think I know where it is?" she asked. "The files," Vorik said, pulling a data pad from his belt and tapping a few buttons. The screen flickered, displaying images of ancient ruins, maps, and coordinates. "I've got all the data on the planet's surface. The tech is buried in an old military facility, deep under the ice. The question is, how do we get to it?" Jax studied the screen, her mind running through the possibilities. She could feel the weight of her next decision bearing down on her. Helping him meant dealing with Vorik's mercenaries, potentially putting herself in a worse position. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the fact that the tech was a weapon of untold power. It had to be kept out of the wrong hands. "How do you plan to retrieve it?" she asked, still skeptical. Vorik's smile didn't waver. "I'm not going to do it alone. That's where you come in. You're the only one who knows how to navigate the old military tech. You can get us inside. You can get us what we need." Jax leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "And if I refuse?" Vorek's expression hardened. Then I make sure everyone you've ever known and loved knows how it feels to cross me. The threat was clear, but it wasn't the first time she'd been threatened. The real danger wasn't Vorek's threats, it was the potential fallout from the alien tech. If it fell into the wrong hands, it could mean the end of everything she had fought for, everything she had worked to build in the shadows. She wasn't just fighting for her own life anymore. She was fighting for something bigger. Fine, she said finally, her voice low and resigned. I'll help you. But you won't control me. If you try, I'll kill every last one of you. Vorek's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. I'm not interested in controlling you, Ainsley. I'm interested in the weapon you can be. And together, we'll change the galaxy. Jax didn't answer. She knew better than to trust Vorek. But for now, she had no choice but to play along. She would use him, use his mercenaries, and once she had what she needed, she would make her move. There was only one rule she lived by in the galaxy: never trust anyone who thinks they can control you. And Vorek Skarn had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The cold air of Xiphus 4 bit at Jax's skin as she stood in the midst of the ruins. The barren landscape stretched out before her, the remnants of an ancient battlefield scattered like broken toys in a forgotten playhouse. The alien technology, buried beneath the planet's surface, was within reach. But so was Vorek. And that fact weighed heavier on her mind than the dusty ruins around her. She was standing on the edge of a precipice, one wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. She'd agreed to cooperate, for now, but she hadn't forgotten who Vorek was. He was a manipulator, a man who'd used every trick in the book to control people. She couldn't trust him. She wouldn't. The facility was hidden beneath layers of ice, an abandoned military base long forgotten by the galaxy's power players. Jax had known about it, of course. She had led missions in the past, covert ones, to retrieve old tech. But what Vorek didn't know was that the technology wasn't just alien. It was alive, or, at least, it had been once. The thought of what that tech could do, in the wrong hands, made her stomach churn. She'd seen it before. People driven mad by the power it offered, their minds consumed by the alien influence. Jax had no illusions: if Vorek succeeded in unearthing it, it would only be a matter of time before the galaxy fell into chaos. Ready? Vorek's voice cut through her thoughts. She turned to face him. He stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, studying her with that same calculating look. His mercenaries were scattered around the area, setting up equipment and preparing for the trek into the facility. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Let's get this over with, Jax replied, her voice steady. She wasn't afraid, she'd walked into worse situations, faced death and worse. But this felt different. She wasn't just fighting for her survival this time. She was fighting for the galaxy's future. As they descended into the ice caves, the temperature dropped even further, and the air grew thick with the smell of stale metal and rot. The deeper they went, the more the weight of the old military facility pressed down on her. Every step she took, every creak of the ice beneath her boots, seemed to echo in the quiet, as if the facility itself was alive, listening, waiting. The deeper they went, the closer they came to the heart of the base. Jax could feel it in her bones, the pulsing energy, the strange hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls, the floor, even the air. It was as though the tech, buried for centuries, was waking up. Tell me again why you think you can handle this, Vorek muttered, catching up to her. You're just a merc now. You don't have the resources you used to have. You're nothing. Jax didn't answer immediately. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, focusing on the path. You underestimate me, she said after a moment. And that's your biggest mistake. They reached the main chamber, the vast room where the alien technology lay hidden beneath a network of ice and rusted metal. Jax's heart skipped a beat as she scanned the room. This was it, the heart of everything. The power that could change the galaxy was right in front of her, concealed within the walls of this cold tomb. Vorek stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He had no idea what he was about to unleash. You're making a mistake, Jax warned, her voice low. You don't understand what's in there. No one does. Don't lecture me, Ainsley, Vorik snapped. I've been at this longer than you. I know exactly what's inside. And once I have it, the galaxy will bend to my will. Then you're already lost. Her words hung in the air, a warning, but it was too late for Vorik to hear it. He reached for the control panel embedded in the wall, his gloved fingers hovering over the ancient interface. The moment he touched it, the room seemed to come alive. The hum in the air intensified, and the walls began to tremble as the technology responded to the input. Jax's instincts screamed at her to stop him, but she knew it was already too late. The moment Vorik triggered the system, everything changed. The chamber's lights flickered on, revealing the tech for what it was. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a sentience, something that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for someone to awaken it. As the panels slid open, revealing the massive core at the center of the room, Jax felt a shiver run down her spine. Vorik stood there, eyes wide, as the alien intelligence unfurled itself in the form of intricate, pulsating energy patterns that seemed to weave through the air like living threads. He had no idea what he had unleashed. You fool, Jax hissed, her mind racing. She could feel the pull of the tech, the way it sought to manipulate her thoughts, twisting and warping her sense of self. This was what had driven so many to madness, this sentience, this power, could bend reality to its will. Vorik turned to her, a smirk still playing at his lips. It's mine now, Ainsley. All of it. I'll be the one to wield this power. But as he spoke, Jax felt it, the tech was turning on him. It didn't care who controlled it. It sought domination, not loyalty. Vorik's body stiffened, his eyes flickering as the alien intelligence began to take hold of him. No, Jax breathed, understanding in an instant. It's not yours. It never was. The realization hit her like a shockwave. The tech didn't need a master, it was the master. She couldn't let Vorik take it any further. There was only one way to stop him, and it was one she had hoped never to resort to. Vorik, she shouted, as he took another step toward the core. Get away from it. But it was too late. With a final, agonized cry, Vorik collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing as the alien intelligence consumed him. The light in his eyes dimmed, and his body lay still. Jax took a step back, horrified but not surprised. She knew this was how it would end. She had always known. The tech pulsed one last time, and then the room fell silent. Jax stood in the center of the chamber, the weight of the decision pressing on her. She had done it. She had stopped Vorik, and in doing so, saved the galaxy from the chaos he would have unleashed. But at what cost? She looked down at her hands, the weight of her past still haunting her. The dagger had been unleashed again, but it had come at a price. Redemption, it seemed, was never as clean as she had hoped. As the facility crumbled around her, Jax realized one thing: she would always be the dagger, whether she wanted to be or not. But for now, that would have to be enough.